So, unfortunately, my friend Tracy Lee can't be with us today. Originally she was going to do this talk, and then she asked me to help, and then she had to pull out entirely for personal reasons. But on her behalf, I do have a Bob Ross finger puppet, which is right here. It's probably the best investment I ever made. There are no broken promises, only observables waiting to happen. So yeah, that's enough weirdness from my house. But I have that on my desk all the time. It's super important to me. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the state of RxJS. Again, my name is Ben Lesh. I'm currently a senior engineer at Citadel Securities. I am also the lead on the RxJS project, and I am formerly of the Angular team, as many of you know. So it's good to be back at ng-conf under these weird circumstances. So I want to talk a little bit, just really briefly, I want to prefix this with what our goals are with RxJS as the RxJS core team's goals. And really, we're a utility library. So we get associated a lot with Angular, but I use it in React projects. I use it in Node. We use it all over the place. I've seen it used all over the place. So our goals are really around trying to be stable and dependable with our releases and trying not to break folks, having smooth updates between releases. We want to improve your developer experience as time goes on, and we want to try to make RxJS smaller and faster to improve your user experience, ideally without you even knowing as you update over time. So let's start off with a little news. So the news around this is around the community. We've got, for one thing, RxJS is growing a lot. So we've got about 18 million, more than 18 million downloads a week now, which is up from like 8 million at this time last year. And that's a lot. And it's NPM downloads though, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, because you could write a bot that did that if you wanted. But it's a fairly organic line, except for that weird dip in December. I don't know what happened there. But it's showing growth, and there's a lot of other signs that the community is growing as well. I also want to take the time to welcome our newest core team member, who's Moshe. And I think I butchered his last name. I might have added an extra E in there. I'm sorry, Moshe. But I met Moshe at Google. He was one of the Googlers that helped me start a kind of a task force inside of Google to make sure that RxJS stays synced inside of Google. He's now at Bloomberg, and he's doing some amazing stuff with TypeScript. He's got some really interesting ideas for things we can do in RxJS to make your experience better. So I'm really, really happy to have him aboard. Very smart guy. Another thing that happened in the last year, just this last September, is we had our first ever all RxJS conference, which was amazing. It was a smaller conference, but it was run by Frosty and friends. And it happened in Vegas. There are some really great videos. Unfortunately, because of a technical gaffe, they didn't get all of the videos, but you can, when I get this out, you can go to the YouTube link and watch some of the videos. Some of the best talks, actually, bar none, the best talks I've ever seen on RxJS in a collection. So I think the last thing that folks heard as I was talking about RxJS Live Vegas, just so you're aware, this was a great conference that happened last September, put on by Frosty and other folks that you probably know. It was a smaller conference, but some of the best talks I've ever seen, actually all of the best talks I've ever seen on RxJS were at this conference. And a lot of them are recorded. Some of them didn't make it through because of technical difficulties with recordings, but you can find those on YouTube, and I'll make sure to get these slides out so you can get that link. There is another RxJS Live coming up in September. It was supposed to be a few weeks ago, but because of current events, it didn't happen. So it's going to be coming up in September. Hopefully we can do it on site. If not, maybe it'll have to be remote or something like that because of, again, current events. So hopefully the world straightens itself out for them. We'll see. That you can find out more information about that at rxjs.live. So let's talk about what's new in version 7. So version 7 is, did I skip something? Oh my gosh, I skipped the most important thing. So this is the biggest thing that's happened is this week, RxJS 7 went to beta. It's been in alpha for a long time. You can still install it from RxJS at Next. And it's at 7.0.0 beta 0 right now. There'll probably be a beta 1 pretty quickly because there's a few things that we want to fix in there. But again, it's in beta. It's pretty stable, and it's got a lot of good stuff in it that I'm going to tell you about here shortly. It's jumping slides, I'm sorry. All right, so what's new in 7.0? So this is what's new in the beta release. We've got improved stability. And what I mean by that is we have a process in place now to try to make sure that we don't have any breakages between patch releases. I'll talk about that shortly. We have better TypeScript support. So we're trying to infer types for you much better. And we're trying to use the latest features of TypeScript 3. We've got some new functionality that's exciting that I'm happy to tell you about. And deprecations, lots of deprecations. But there are things that have been built up over time, and we haven't removed anything yet because we don't want people to break because we removed an API. And we've got a plan for that over the course of version 7. So I'm going to talk about that when I talk about what's going to happen in version 7.1 and beyond. Let's see. All right. It's really jumping on slides. I don't know why. All right. So I want to talk about improved stability. So with improved stability, what I'm talking about is we're partnering with Google. So as a lot of you know, we used to work at Google. When I left Google, there was some concern about whether or not Google would be able to keep RxJS up to date internally, and it was to the point where they were worried they were going to have to fork RxJS or something like that. There's no reason, it hasn't ever really been a good reason to do that, but just to try to make sure that Google was in a good place and to make sure that RxJS was in a good place. I worked with Moshe, who I mentioned earlier, who's our newest RxJS core team member now, who worked at Google to set up a task force that puts the latest version of RxJS into Google 3, which is their monorepository, and runs it against all of their build targets. So thousands and thousands of build targets, tons of apps using RxJS in every way you can imagine to see what breaks. And they report to us and they let us know what breaks, and we work with them to resolve those issues well before you would ever see a published release on NPM. So that's going to do a lot to make sure that new, especially patch releases, have no breaking changes in them. The other thing that's going on is, oh, geez, man, I don't understand why it's so slow to update these slides. Sorry. So the other thing about this is these two Googlers are helping us with these efforts, and I really want to thank them, Christine and Michael James. I don't know if they're watching, but they have worked tirelessly to help us update Google 3 through this. It's a major release that we're doing right now from 6 to 7. So there are some breaking changes. So they've been working to update through those breaking changes and working with us on what we need to change on our end and what they might need to change on their end in order to get those things out and make sure that this release is good for you. So another thing is we're on the latest version of TypeScript now, so 3.8. And that means we can use the latest features in TypeScript. And we've made a lot of typing changes, particularly things to generics that will help you out so you get better type inference in RxJS. So for example, in argument inference. Now, what I mean by this is basically everywhere we can where you are passing in a rest of arguments, we do our best to try to figure out what those arguments are, or what, say, there's a whole bunch of different observables or something like that, and return an observable that matches all those types. So before, we might have had an upper bound limit of like 8 or 9 values, and then after that, we couldn't infer the type anymore. Now we have, you can go up to any number of values, and TypeScript will figure it out. So one example of this would be the simplest one, which is of. If you had more than 9 different types or 9 values passed to of, it would freak out that you'd get a build time error in TypeScript, and it would say, hey, one of these isn't a scheduler like. And that's wrong on so many levels. One, we're trying to get scheduler out of, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But 2, like, it just sucks that this is your experience. The other thing is the observable you did get back would be wrong. So it actually goes to I and doesn't even include J. So it's the wrong type that you get back anyway. So even if you did get past that build error with any or something like that, you still got the wrong result. In the latest version of RxJS, this is much better. So you actually get back the proper type in these scenarios. And you could add 20 more on there and it would still figure out what you need. So, and this is true for of and merge and all sorts of other things that take these sorts of arguments. So we fixed those. We also fixed some bad types. And what I mean by bad types are types that did not reflect the runtime behavior of actual APIs. So if you noticed in the chat earlier, I was razzing David East a little bit about his use of toPromise. toPromise is actually one of those that had bad type. So you look at this and it looks like it's okay. So you've got this get names, and it's returning an observable of arrays of strings. And when you to promise it, everything here looks like it's just fine. But what you don't notice is the type of names that's returned from that async await, from that await, is actually string or undefined. And this is in version 7, and this is the correct behavior. And the reason this is the correct behavior is if names happen to be empty, say it never emitted a value and it just completed, to promise will resolve as undefined. And it's done that since version 5. It's always done that. And that's part of legacy behavior from even before version 5. And this meant that our typings for it were incorrect. So the proper typing is to always have or undefined. Now, what that means for you is if you're using this, you're going to sometimes see this, where you maybe were expecting a particular type and now you await it and you have this error here. It's either, the solution is to either put a bang after to promise because you know it's going to give you a value, or just type it properly and account for the fact that it could be undefined, because this is correct. It's trying to help you. So there's also the fact that we're deprecating to promise because of this weird behavior. And we have some replacements for it that are new features in version 7 that I'll talk about in a little bit. So union type returns are better. We started doing this during version 6, and actually a few of the updates broke people, in particular, I think concat map and merge map, but we've now got this to where we've updated it throughout the library. And what this means is if you have, and this in particular affects people that are using ngrx, where you might have effects that are returning different types of actions, and it freaks out trying to figure out what type of action is being returned from inside the concat map, and you get the wrong return type from the observable. So this will resolve that issue, and you won't have to explicitly type things anymore. It'll just infer it properly. All right, let's move on to what everybody likes to talk about, new features, like we needed more features in RxJS. First one is animation frames. So this was an idea that was brought up actually last year at ng-conf, I believe. And what this is, and you just saw that animate, I'll play it one more time. What this is it is a static method that is an observable that fires on animation frames and gives you the milliseconds elapsed since the start of the observable. So it's useful for doing animations, and it's much more useful than what the contemporaries were that people did all the time. So there's many different ways to make an observable of animation frames currently in the library. This is the old and busted ways. Interval of 0 with an animation frame scheduler, range of 0 like to infinity with an animation frame scheduler, timer again, same thing. These are all, they all do identical stuff. But the stink about this is, if someone's doing this, it's because they know something about the internal implementation of RxJS in these particular functions. It's not because it's the best way to do it. So it sucks that people had to know these recipes to do it, and we've resolved that by giving you animation frames, which again is better because it gives you the milliseconds elapsed since it started, which is much more useful than just an incrementing counter. So that's there for you. We also have new promise conversion functions. So these are what I was talking about with to promise before. My slides are being slow. There we go. So we've got last value from. This replaces to promise outright. So last value from, what this does is it does exactly what to promise should have done, in that it just waits to the last value, or waits for the promise to complete and then resolves with the last value. But if the promise completes without giving you a value, say, for example, you give it an empty promise, it actually will reject with an empty error that you can test for later on and say, hey, was this empty? Like, and not just an observable that could have emitted undefined, right? So or a promise that returned undefined or something like that. So like you can actually, this is much better behavior, and then you can default it to something. So this is more what you would expect from a promise that never gives you a value. This was empty. All right, so that's much better behavior. We also created first value from. So this is the problem with toPromise before was that people had a hard time rationalizing, why is it the last value? Why isn't it the first value? And so on. Now it's pretty explicit. You know, when you read the code, you're awaiting the first value from this observable. And what this does, it waits for the first value to arrive. It resolves a promise with it, and then immediately unsubscribes from that observable source. The other thing about this is it will also reject with an empty error if the observable completes without emitting a value. But just a reminder, you only want to use this when necessary. You lose cancellation when you convert to a promise. This is only for APIs that require promises. So like legacy APIs or async await, that sort of thing. Very sorry, my slides are being slow. There we go. We also added, and I'm excited about this, async iterable support. So in this example, I've made this ticker with an async generator function called async ticker. And it's got this await wait in there. It's kind of funny to read await wait. But wait is just some function that waits for a certain number of milliseconds and resolves a promise. So I've got this while true, and basically what this is it's going to return what's called an async iterable, which when you next off of it gives you a promise to the next value, essentially, to an iterator result. And now in RxJS, anywhere that accepted a promise or an observable before will now also accept an async iterable. So you can return an async iterable inside of a concat map or to defer or something like that. In RxJS just looks for that symbol.async iterator, and you can read more about that in Mozilla Developer Network. But it provides some really interesting new possibilities. For example, I'm using defer here with an async function star. You could use a map or a merge map or something with async function star as well. And in this, I'm saying, okay, well, I want to wait to load the user, and then I want to start a loop that goes and does some like long polling with a promise-based API or something that goes and gets the messages for that user by username. And when it gets it, if I have it, I want to yield those messages. And then it comes back around to the loop. And then I do my processing in the observable, and it says, okay, well, let's do the next one. And so defer is going to give me an observable of user messages via this long polling that I think you can compose in like interesting ways with an async function. We chose not to add conversion the other way around into the core of the library. The functionality was written into that PR by yours truly, but we talked about it in the core team meeting, and we decided that it would be best to split that off to the side for now, because there was a lot of different ways to take an observable and convert it to an async iterator, where there's only really one valid way you should consume an async iterator as an observable. So we decided you could consume async iterators with RxJS, but to convert from an observable the other direction, there's this other library, which again is the exact code that we had in, we were going to put in RxJS. We've just put it in its own library called RxJS 408. And you can see there on the side, there's an example where it's doing each value from source. What that's going to do is subscribe to the source. It's going to wait for a value from that source, or as it gets values, it's going to buffer them up. And then it's going to go through that 408 loop. There's actually 4 different ways you can use it. There's each value from, that gives you every single value one at a time. There's buffered values from, so that takes the buffered values that have arrived while you were going through that loop and just gives you the whole buffer every single time you hit the top of that loop or when something arrives. There is latest value from, which gives you the most recent value that arrived from the source, and next value from, which will wait for the next value to arrive from the source before it goes back into that loop. So these are all really interesting features. The other thing that you might want to check out if you're interested in async iterables is RxJS. So this is also developed by members of the RxJS core team. So Matt Pavlasaki in particular and Paul Taylor have been working really hard on RxJS. This is basically RxJS, but for async iterables. It's got different use cases. It's particularly useful, I think, for Node, but it's pull-based instead of push-based. So go check that out. Sorry, though, this is one thing about async iterables is async await, the promise is returned by them, zones can't patch it. So it will cause problems in Zone. I'm sure there's probably workarounds for this that I'm just not aware of, but that's something to be aware of, is if you try to use these things natively, you could have problems with Zone.js. All right, another new feature, reset on success true for retry. This seems minor, but it's a thing where if you have a source and it errors, and you have like a retry count 3, what happens is it retries once, it retries again, and then maybe it starts being successful again for a while. But then when it errors again, in version 6, it would only have 1 retry left. It wouldn't reset that counter. So we added a feature. It's actually a non-breaking change, but we added a feature called reset on success that you can configure. And basically what that just says is if you do get 1 successful message through, then reset that counter back to 3. So that's useful for some folks. Another new feature, but they're not really new features, they're just renamed. Concat with, merge with, zip with, with. So basically what this is we took all of our legacy operators like race, zip, combine, latest, merge, concat, that were operators that had the same name as some of the creation methods, and we renamed them to have with on the end. And that kind of is more uniform with the rest of the operators in the library. We were going to remove them, but we discovered, especially through working with Google, that there were still a lot of people using these, in particular like concat. So these are just renames, and we are going to remove the deprecated ones in the next version. So deprecations, we have a lot of deprecations this version, but we didn't remove hardly anything. So you shouldn't see any broken code because of missing stuff. Result selectors, they've been deprecated since 5.5. We still have them in there. Don't use them, but they're still in there. We haven't removed them in this version. Scheduler arguments are deprecated. So like if you're passing schedulers to of or range or some of these other things, we want you to stop doing that. Some of the things that require schedulers, like things that actually require timing, like timer or interval, that they'll probably stay there, but these not as much. What we want you to do is use the new scheduled API, which was actually introduced last year, and observe on, which has been around for a while. So this is a better way to do that. And this is just to move forward so we can try to like pull some of the scheduling logic out of operators that really don't need it in a lot of cases. Deprecated subscription signatures. Now, this is something where this is going to be jarring for some folks, but we've got good reasons behind doing this. We're trying to narrow down the different ways you can call subscribe and tap, but mostly subscribe. Slow slide. And there. All right. So here's what's okay. Here's what we're not deprecating. So basically subscribe with 1 argument, if you want to think about it that way. You can either call subscribe with a function, or you call subscribe with an observer or a partial observer. The other ways will not break. You want to call it with 3 functions right now. It's not broken, just deprecated. But the reason for this is it becomes very clear to say, oh, I want to subscribe to this and I only care about errors. You're going to be forced to have an object in there that says error and has a function after it, right? So you know which is an error and which is next. The deprecated version would be like this, and you've got subscribe with multiple functions passed to it. The reason that we wanted to deprecate this is, 1, it's a bad developer experience. This is an experience where people have to go and they literally have to count to figure out, am I in the next function? Am I in the error function, or am I in the complete function? So it could be like null function or null function or something like that. And it's just not a really good experience for folks. So it's much better to have an object in there where you have to name what those things are. A little more verbose maybe, but it's a better developer experience. And the other thing is, internal to the library right now, we have this logic to reconcile. Did you pass a function or an object, or did you pass more than 1 function, or are there 3 arguments and so on? Every time you subscribe to an observable, we have to do this reconciliation to see what you've subscribed with. So this will help us in version 8 remove all of that logic, and we can just say, did you give us a function or did you give us an object? And we know what to do with it, and it makes the library smaller and more efficient. Again, tap is the same thing. It's basically subscribe, only it's an operator, right? So it's the same thing. You want to try to provide 1 argument to it. The other things are still there. They still work. They're just deprecated. And again, here's what it looks like, deprecated tap. We want to reduce the scheduler footprint in this upcoming release, and we already have. So right now, if you're just using share replay, for example, that's all you use, you're going to end up including about 4K worth of code that is all scheduler code that you're probably not even using at all. And it's just because replay subject is used inside of share replay, and replay subject was using scheduler to get a timestamp, and that's it. It wasn't using the scheduling part of it at all. And there's several ways this could end up happening to you, and you could end up bloating your app by 4K that you didn't even mean to. So things like interval timer, audit time, these other things, like over time, we want to move to where these things are not things that are adding extra code to you unless you actually explicitly want to use schedulers. So we're going to keep moving that direction over the course of version 7 in non-breaking ways, and then eventually try to phase out passing schedulers to some of these where we can for version 8. One of the ways we did that is with timestamp providers. That's new in version 7. It's just an interface, and it's an interface that has a now method on it that returns a number. And the reason that's interesting is we were able to default replay subject's third argument to, instead of defaulting it to like async scheduler or whatever it was defaulted to before, now it's defaulted to, it's actually defaulted to the date object. So date object's native, we don't have to ship that. You could also use, in this case, you could use the performance object, which has a now method on it that returns a number if you wanted some really, really precise caching in your replay subject. I don't know why you do this, but I would love to see the amazing rationale behind this. Anyways, but you could do that, or you could pass any object that just has a now method to replace subject, and other things like the time interval operator and so on. All right, now I want to talk about 7.1 and beyond. So I just talked about all these deprecations and things that are going to change over time. The minor versions of 7 are, we may release some small new features where there's some things that we're eyeing, but they'll be kind of off to the side of the main bulk of what you use in RxJS. The biggest thing we want to do is in each version, we want to release ESLint transformations or other code transformations that help automate updating your app to not use all of the deprecated APIs. So really what we want to do is make sure that every single new major version of 7 that comes out, it's not a breaking change because it's not a major version. So minor version, as every new minor version that comes out of version 7. It's not a breaking change because we're working with Google to ensure that, and these are minor improvements. And we're providing new ESLint rules to help you not write bad stuff. And we're actually helping you transform your code automatically away from deprecated APIs so that when we get to version 8, you're not jarred with this, oh my God, here's some huge amount of work I have to do to try to update all of my code. So version 8, the asterisk here is maybe it'll end up being version 9. You don't know. Like something could happen where we need to introduce a breaking change to accommodate browser things or runtime things or whatever. Not likely, but it's possible. So this is finally going to be T-Rex. So this is something that I have been working on and like chomping at the bit to do for 2 years. But to be responsible, I can't just jump to a leaner, smaller version of RxJS without slowly migrating folks there. We have some experiments already that were done. The experimental branches still exist. You can go check them out. But like the version we settled on tends to be about 40% smaller and like Angular app sizes as far as the footprint of RxJS. So, and this is where we're going to finally remove everything that we can that's been deprecated, as long as we were able to make code transformations for it during the course of 7. And of course, we're always going to try to keep up with the latest advancements in JavaScript and TypeScript. So those are big things. But again, we can't even do this until we get done with all of the code transformation, migration tool type stuff. I think that I'm stuck again. All right. Yes. All right. So one of the questions I get from a lot of folks is, how can you help us? There's people that want to help the project. One area we're going to need a lot of help is if you have any expertise in doing code transformations. This is going to be a huge, important part of our project coming up. All of this is volunteer work. Nobody is being paid by a company to do massive amounts of work against the main repository. We get some contributions every now and then from companies or from Google or whatever, but they're onesie twosie. Most of this work is done totally by volunteers. And the bulk of the library work is mostly taken care of, or will be taken care of by core team members. But like areas where we need help are going to be with ESLint code transformations. Documentation needs a lot of updates because we're going to be making changes, and some of the deprecated APIs are still documented, and we might want to remove those or change some of the wording around them. Or like the subscriptions, how we want people to subscribe. A lot of the subscriptions might be done in deprecated ways in some of the documentation. You can help our community. This is even bigger than the first two, honestly. Articles and how-tos, videos, mentoring your friends. Like if you're really good at RxJS and you want to help other people, or mentoring people that you don't even know online, like please do. Some of the best experiences in my life have been from helping, and some of the best benefits to my career have been from helping people that I don't know on the internet. So I highly recommend doing that. Doing some research on RxJS or developer tools. Like if you want to do research, like who's using what operators or whatever, like that stuff's useful to us, and we're happy to work with you on all of that stuff. If you're doing something compelling, we'd love to help you out. We'd love to interact with you on those things. And of course, making libraries. So if you're building a library with RxJS or that's built around a reactivity in RxJS, please reach out to us and let us know about it, and ask us how we can help you. And then, do what you can to, we'll do what we can to get it out there, because these libraries give people more exposure to RxJS, which helps build the knowledge base, which helps makes everyone's experience working with it that much better. So thank you. That's all I have. Please stay safe this year. These are extraordinary times. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I hope you enjoy your time.